Pastor Ben Miller here again from Bumpfield Bible Church, and today we're going to look at Marx's fourth plank in his Communist Manifesto, and we are going to ask the question today: should the government take your neighbor's property? That might seem like a strange question, but let's read first. Let's read Marx's fourth plank here, which says, "The confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels." And of course, we know, according to what Jesus told us, that our neighbor is everyone, from the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so Marx is saying that, notice Marx not talking about illegal immigration as opposed to legal immigration. He just says all immigrants, their property, the government should just swoop in and take it, and all rebels. And that should also cause us to ask the question, though, who are the rebels that Marx is talking about? And we will look at that one in a second. But let's just take this idea of immigrants for an example. We know, what does Scripture say about this? Actually, in Leviticus, Leviticus is very interesting. Leviticus 19, remember Leviticus is part of the first 5 books of the law, the books of the Bible, which is known as the Torah or law. And so Leviticus 19:34 says, "You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And so we see very clearly that when the Ten Commandments says, "Thou shalt not steal," it doesn't just mean thou shalt not steal from an Israelite. That means you shall not steal from the immigrant who is just sojourning in your land. And you should treat him well because you were a sojourner in Egypt. They didn't treat you well. You didn't like that. So you should treat them well. And you should love them as what? As yourself. Which we know Jesus takes the 10 Commandments, sums them up into 2, right? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so that really causes a problem for Marxism when it takes hold, and it just wants to swipe in and take all immigrants' stuff. It's not a biblical principle at all. So secondly, the second thing we want to look at, though, is who does Marx consider a rebel? Now, because we've seen wherever Marx's principles are implemented, say like Nazi Germany or Communist Russia, really rebel is a term that is used to describe anybody who disagrees with me. Not just somebody who may pick up arms and fight a civil war against me or is making terrorist attacks, but just anybody who disagrees with my ideology. And so Marx's idea is really quite simple, at least certainly how it's been applied is this. It's the elimination of free speech, is what it ultimately is, which we know is protected by our Constitution, right? It's the elimination of free speech. If you disagree with me, you are a rebel, and you are dangerous, and you must be suppressed. And one of the ways in which we're going to suppress you is by taking your property, your right to own property. We're going to suppress you in that way. If you think I'm going a little too far, I got some examples from modern-day China where this is happening, a communist regime. And this I got from articles from the New York Post, or not the New York Post, the New York Times, as well as NPR, which I think is interesting. They might not always quite have the same take as I do on things, but just to give you an idea of what's going on there. So my first quote here from the Times, There in a training school set up by the government, the prescribed answer began. If pressed, officials were to tell students that their relatives were not criminals, yet could not leave these schools. And what this is referring to is a Muslim group in China who the government's put about 1.5 million of them into these camps, into these work camps, and suppressed them because they are Muslim. Because they're supposedly afraid of terrorist attacks by a few, so they therefore imprison everybody. The whole community, their land and everything in prison. Students come home from college and their parents are gone, and this is what the Chinese officials are telling them. They are in a training school set up by the government. Really? Really. Next quote. The question and answer script also included a barely concealed threat. Students were to be told that their behavior could either shorten or extend the detention of their relatives. And really, so what you really see happen is this Muslim group disagrees with the government, therefore we are going to crush them. And yes, you heard it here, a Baptist Bible-believing pastor saying that even Muslims, minority Muslim groups, should not be suppressed simply because they're Muslims or simply because they disagree with the government. That doesn't mean I'm one of those, doesn't mean I believe Islam is a peaceful religion or there isn't Islamic terrorist groups that are really bad or that I believe things that are totally different from them. But because of what Scripture says, I believe that treat my neighbor as myself, to love my neighbor as myself. And that includes even my enemies. The Scripture makes very clear. And it is not right for the communist government in China to do this, simply because they can. Then my quote, so we see those things, and then I'd also warn you that we see a small attitude as part of us, and I don't think this is something we have to, perhaps like this election cycle or even in the next coming cycles, worry about, but we see even this kind of attitude growing up in the United States. For example, Robert Rich on Twitter says this: "When this nightmare is over," referring to the Trump administration, "we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission." Sounds a lot like the training school that the Chinese government set up. "It would erase Trump's lies, confront those who have been harmed by his hatefulness, and name every official, politician, executive, and media Mongol whose greed and cowardice enabled this catastrophe," end quote. So what he's saying is, if you disagree with Trump, or excuse me, if you disagree with me, if you agree with Trump, once we get power, we're coming after you and you need to be eradicated because you are rebels to the state. He didn't use those words, but that's what he's inferring. That's communist doctrine. That's Marxism. And we need to be aware of that. And of course, we even know the Fourth Amendment even speaks to this. Because the Fourth Amendment says, "The right of the people to be secure in their personal houses, papers, and effects against" what? "Unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated." Now just think about that. Just because I disagree with you politically, just because I have migrated legally here to the United States, is that reason to have my property confiscated? According to Marx, it is. And that should cause for us some concern, especially when we see movements like Black Lives Matter, which come out and say they're a Marxist movement. It should really cause us to think about what they're really pushing and what they're trying to achieve. And so the answer then to our question is this: Marxism wants to oppress immigrants and anyone who disagrees with them. And this is an unbiblical idea, as well as it goes against the law of the United States, which we see in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. Till next time, this is Pastor Ben Miller signing off. Live long and prosper.